All right, thank you everyone for joining. I really, really do appreciate it. So you're all here to hear about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, which is batch. Data is at risk. That's not the exact title, I know, but it's at risk. Your batch data is exposed. Let's just face it, we live in a mainframe world. We live in a world in which we all want to be viable. We want to make sure that what we're doing makes sense and that we're providing input and value to our organization. So let's define what the problem is, right? What are we trying to solve? Well, we're trying to solve the fact that we live in a world in which they're calling it the digital disruption, right? Everybody is worried about balancing risk and compliance in a world in which everything is about now. And we are the brick and mortars of the world. We were never about the now. Batch is definitely not about the now. It was never written for the now. It was never thought of for the now. Let's face it, availability solutions, backup solutions, all of the things that are put in place around batch were way back when, and nobody really thought about anything but maybe a tape to back it all up to. And have we really changed it? And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But more importantly, what's the business dealing with? Does the business really even care about batch? Does he really even care about the mainframe? What he worries about is risk and compliance. He needs to provide a stable, secure, high-performance system. And the mainframe does that, right? It does it well. But he has to deliver innovative, technology-intensive services quickly. We're not always thought of that, right? So we do a lot of things well, but we got to do some things better in order for us to be viable in this brick-and-mortar age. So digital disruption has been a double-edged sword for us, right? From one perspective, we are secure, for the most part. We forget we're part of an ecosystem sometimes, but our platform, we have pervasive encryption, we do all of these really, really cool things, and we are viable in the area of risk. We feel really good about that, sometimes too good, because sometimes we forget we're part of an overall ecosystem that we need to really be a part of and understand. But security is a major worry. It's on all of their annual reports. And because of that, you have things called air gap, where you want to put some copy of data behind that glass. And I want to isolate that data. But I have a question. Let's talk about batch for a second. When you put all that isolated data behind that glass, can you use the data? Remember the days of full volume backups? Why did we ever go to a concept of application recovery? Because when you did those full volumes, could you get a clean copy? And so with the data usable, that is the problem with any form of technology that's trying to sync up any of your batch. Your databases are fine, and let's face it, high availability solutions from GDPS to GDR, they do an amazing job at helping you get where you need to be. But ask them about batch, and whose responsibility is it? Batch people, applications. The silence right now is a little uncomfortable. That's the silence you hear when you have problems in batch, because what are you going to do? It's about at this rate. We're going to call the application owners. This is acceptable. We have SLAs that are minutes and hours, but we're going to take our time with batch. We're not going to take advantage of things like cascaded flashcopy or ZDP. We're not going to make that intelligent, and we're not going to really push the environment and the business to do smarter things. We're just going to continue saying it's something we can ignore. We're in a digital age. We have high performance. The business is worried about having air gap. They're worried about having architecture and technology that meets the standards and the threats of the environments today. We say we are a mainframe environment that does this, but yet we simply ignore one very large aspect of our environment, and it's batch. And we do that because we say it's not our job. We say it's somebody else's job. We say because we really don't want to. Okay, that's fair. But if you really think about it, 70% of the IT budget today is done for day-to-day. Do you really think that that's what the business wants to do? You're a brick and mortar company. You need to get into the digital age. That's where the CEO, the CIO, and all of the people that are above you get paid on. They don't want to be spending 70% of their budget on this. They want to make sure through analytics and other means that they're getting the best they can. The infrastructure and operational leaders, that's what I and O is, by the way. I had to remind myself of that this morning. They're responsible for not just keeping it steady state. They need to modernize. How do you modernize without analytics? How do you modernize without automating the process? We would never accept for databases, never in a million years, that you would sit with a database without a log in a journal and the ability for you to recover that in a reasonable amount of time, like now. But when it comes to batch, we don't seem to want to hurry it up. We want to go existing processes that have been around forever. So it's impossible for us to really say that we're going to have an infrastructure modernization project within the mainframe if we're not going to seriously look at how we use analytics and automation in our batch process. So let's take it from a 20,000-foot level. Mainframes aren't dead, but they're doubted. Why? Because we don't change. We don't accept the fact that we have to change some of these pieces, including the batch. And if it sounds like I'm being a little redundant here, I am. I've been talking about this for 20 years. I've been saying for 20 years, we got to fix the way we're doing it. Hardware vendors are coming to the table. They're coming out with solutions. But we have to make those solutions intelligent. We have to work together with them. We have to be providing projects and processes that are integrated between the software and the hardware in order to make it smarter so we can do the things we need to do. Our budgets are being scrutinized. We have to use analytics to not only work within our budgets, but in order to automate things. That will push down the cost of what we're doing. We don't want to say that this is a people problem. This is an automation and an analytics problem. And it can be done from that perspective. And let's face it, a lot of you plan on retiring. And sad to say, some of you are hiding, waiting for retirement. And you don't want to rock the boat while you're hiding and waiting for retirement. And so what basically you're doing is you're sitting there saying, if I can just retire, if I just don't get noticed, if I don't bring anything new to the plate, I'll get to my retirement and I'll get out the door. But that doesn't help the ecosystem we're living in today. The ecosystem we're living in today is going to go beyond you. And it would be really nice if you helped us bring these new technologies to the table so that the ecosystem can stay viable. If we don't want to be doubted, we have to stop doubting and hiding ourselves and have faith in the ecosystem we've grown to love and grew up with so that we can be a viable part of what brings that ecosystem and continues on beyond. So we are not a legacy. We provide the environment a legacy, something that they can grow from. And I think that is very vital. How are we going to provide an outlook into the future where IoT and cloud and digital and intelligence and artificial intelligence and all of those pieces in DevOps are part of the future? It is the mainframe's future. We are a part of an ecosystem in which we have a lot to offer. And so instead, we want to have a little bit of noise about what we're doing. We want to speak up about what our issues truly are, but we just don't want to say what our problems are. We want to point to the solutions. So there are solutions to this whole concept of batch. So what are our goals? We want to improve agility. Yes, improve agility in the mainframe. Agile is not a bad word. It's the word that everybody else uses. What it means is that you put information out from a periodic basis throughout the year that improves your ecosystem, improves your environment. You put it out incrementally, and everybody gets to benefit. You don't wait until you have a huge thing to give them. You give them a little bit constantly. They're used to it. They have this thing called a cell phone that forces you to do it every time you don't want to. You know, Windows forces me to do it every time I don't want to. Now, I don't like that. I'd like to have the choice. They say it's an option, but I don't know how to figure out that option. But the reality is we in the mainframe have to be a little bit more agile. We also have to improve our quality of service. We cannot say that we're going to get it to them tomorrow. They want it today. So let's go back to batch for a second. When we talk about an agile batch environment, does that sound like an oxymoron? When we talk about recovering batch, do we say, well, we'll go to the scheduler and then we'll talk to the application people, and you know, we have these run restart procedures, and we never really kind of tested them from a corruption perspective, and oh my goodness, let's not have that on the weekend, And if we had corruption that went back 3, 4, 5 days, well, I'm not really quite sure what I'd do with all that, right? How long would that take? Can we answer that? I bet you have logs and journals on everything else you could, right? So we have to be able to be willing to face the challenge. And here's the reality. Here's a myth. The mainframe is becoming more and more viable. In 2016, it said 42%. In 2017, 47%. Let's face it, I think they're coming to terms with the fact that since 1995, when Y2K started to be something they thought about, and they said what they were going to do was get off the mainframe, that by 2018, those same companies are beginning to realize they're not getting off the mainframe. It is a viable infrastructure component. We're not the main component in most cases. In some cases we are, but we are viable. Most organizations that have 10,000 MSUs and above, you probably couldn't process that unless you got a building the size of the state of Rhode Island. I mean, 50,000 MSUs, how are you going to process that? Right? So we have to understand that we are being seen as a piece that is going to stay. But we also have to accept the fact that when they talk about where they want to go, they are saying that security, application availability, and application modernization is top of their key. That's great. How are they going to do that unless you improve your automation and analytics? You have to help them understand that in order to do what they want, they have to improve their operational analytics and improve their automation. Otherwise, that can't come into existence. Sometimes you have to explain to people what they want isn't quite what they're going to get. Like, it doesn't come magically. We don't improve something because we're here. We have to step to it. One of the biggest problems within our environment that makes it very difficult is we silo. I'm in storage. I'm in applications. I'm in operations. I only do the scheduler. We get down to that level, right? We don't think of the business. Your applications are running a business. Doesn't matter where you're at. And you're not just an application. You're part of an ecosystem that's feeding you and being fed by you. And it doesn't matter where those applications are and on what platform, right? You have to be able to understand when your batch applications have NDM and FTP feeds to them, where are they? Where are they coming from? What am I doing with them? How am I getting that? You know, and this isn't only about batch. This is about, in a way, our mindset around the mainframe and what we do for a living. Do we consider it important, and do we see ourselves where we have to provide the improvements, or are we just riding until we retire? And that's only a question we can answer. But hopefully what we're doing is breaking down some of those silos and providing to the business and the ecosystem what the mainframe is best at. Now everyone says, well, machine learning and big data. And of course, we're never going to have willful disruption and intent. Yes, we will. And machine learning, okay, so maybe I'm a little naive here, but doesn't SMF give us a whole lot of information about our machine? Doesn't RMF, doesn't all those things that are the underpinnings of our environment, aren't we the model of machine learning? I understand there's a lot more to it from a business perspective. I mean, if you have a doctor, you're going to feed all of this information and it feeds you back stuff, right? But from an operational perspective, we have the best system out there. It can tell us anything. We just have to use it. We say we don't have enough people, use the machine. How about big data? We have more information about what's going on. What other platform has things like SMF? We have the data. I know that's not the intent of big data. I know they're talking about doing analytics about what you buy on Tuesday of every week when you go grocery shopping. You always get Tide, you always get Downy. Let's kick out a coupon to make sure you buy Tide and Downy. I get that. But in our world, big data is everything that's on that mainframe that makes the ability to do analytics and automation possible. We can predict, we can do things to be smarter, so we don't need the people. Okay, so retire. But retire with providing your organization with the ability to do what they can't do today. So the challenges are, from an IT operational perspective, is we need to keep the business running. I'm not going to read this slide to you, right? But we have a lot of pieces within the environment that we just need to do. That's our job. But we have to make it around the clock available. that is not just available from the perspective as I fail over from site A to site B, and I test that, and I'm good. That's not what we're talking about. Resiliency, the ability for you to be able to do and run your business no matter what happens. That includes all aspects of an operational environment. That is what we need to do. And it's increasingly strained. You can read the reasons why. You probably could tell me why it's increasingly strained better than I can tell you. I just get to talk to all of you and you tell me, and I could be a parrot. But you know why you're strained. Less people, less money, less resources on all kinds of levels. But we have the best system with the most analytics behind it. Let's use it and let's automate to it. And let's not ignore certain aspects of our business that are our Achilles heel, right? So, in order to have a comprehensive view of our applications across the mainframe, and I mean across the mainframe, we have to understand the dependencies. If we say I'm recovering my databases this way, but my batch this way, are we going across the mainframe? We're ignoring a whole segment. I've had people tell me it's not important. I've had people tell me it's okay the way we do it because if it takes me 8 hours, 10 hours, it's all right, it's acceptable. I question that. Is your RTO and RPO, your SLA, the business thinks you have? If you've just bought a gazillion dollars, and I say a gazillion, I don't know what it really costs, but if you have a gazillion dollars worth of hardware you just invested in, with all the bandwidth and all the replications and the 2 and 3 and 4 copies, does your environment know that when it comes to your mainframe patch, we're just going to go talk to the scheduler and the application, we're going to make some phone calls, we're going to get on a bridge. It's corrupted data. He doesn't care what the event was. You can't roll that back. Or can you? Are there tools? Could you do it different? Should be you taking advantage of newer technologies from a hardware and software perspective? We have to look at what we're doing different. We cannot assume that across the mainframe means everything but batch. Right? We also have to ensure that we have resiliency, and we have to accomplish our objectives. And I put that only out there because we have limited resources to do this. But see this table? Let's pretend there's the CEO and the CFO and the CIO. And let's see, who's at that table with them? This distributed group and this other group. Who from the mainframe group ends up at this table normally making our case? We've kind of lost our seat there because we've lost sight of the objective. The objective was for us to be a strong business tool that helped them make good decisions for faster and better recovery. But because we kind of have lagged a little, we don't even have a seat there. That's why it's very, very important that we actually become more agile. We actually take into consideration those areas that are at risk for us. Otherwise, that's what we lose. So, analytics with automation. To me, that doesn't matter whether it's in the resiliency area, which is the batch area, which I tend to know most about, or if it's analytics for performance or analytics for capacity. Any form of analytics you can put into your environment and be able to take advantage of from an automation perspective is only going to help your environment. The more you put analytics in place, the more that it can learn, the more that you will not have to do this manually. Anything you don't do manually is a plus, right? Would you manually recover all of your databases? Why do we manually do so many things, especially when it comes to batch? So, if we want to be resilient, we have to make sure that things are available, that they're reliable, and that there's integrity and there's confidence in what we're doing. That can only come if we actually put processes in place. So time is your enemy. How long do you think it takes a millennial to walk away from an environment that's doing this? This is your CEO's biggest nightmare. The mainframe batch applications didn't finish on time last night, and this is what they're getting. Within 15 seconds, they're gone. You don't even know that they walked away from your bank, your insurance company, or whatever it is that you're selling. Your delays cost your business money. So the so what is what's your role in the enterprise. If you do not have adequate processes across the spectrum, your role in the enterprise will shrink, right? How are you going to fix it? You can no longer say it's not my responsibility. Your job is your responsibility, right? You all want to be, this ecosystem is your responsibility, and the viability of it is. It's kind of interesting. If you think about a ball of yarn and you unravel it, it's kind of what applications are, right? And one of the problems is the batch is like the cat that got in the middle of it. It makes knots. It's unpredictable. People don't always know where pieces go. And so for us to be able to actually be able to unravel that line, we have to understand the interdependencies, the external interfaces, and you have to be able to say that you can actually meet the SLA. And you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you ever have tested your run restarts? Isn't that what you're depending on when you say that when you don't have a disaster recovery plan that is part of your overall strategy for actually recovering the application? I'm not talking about failover. I'm not talking about all the hardware things that you've put in place, because God knows they work. I'm talking about the individual applications, the pieces that matter, the business. We don't. So I just want to remind you of something. Batch jobs often used to complete in the batch window. That doesn't happen anymore. Batch is now 24/7. That's a 90s thought. It was designed when these were still used, and we really haven't changed it. If you think about it, that's how they're designed. They were never designed for active-active. It just wasn't. So if you're going to have continuous operations, if you're going to really think about your data in a different way, you have to put into place solutions that are going to solve that, right? And that is key. And if you don't, what does your business always say? We'll either outsource you or we're going to replace it with another platform. We want neither, right? And if you happen to be outsourced, it's really imperative that you actually take this into consideration even more, because your outsourcer is generally not responsible for your application recovery. You still are. And how good is it really if you don't have control? At least when it's in-house, you have a sense. If it's not in-house, 9 times out of 10, I have not seen many outsourcers that have been willing to say that they are responsible for those applications. That is your data. You did not, when you handed over the ability for them to do the work, they did not take on responsibility to make sure it was resilient and available to you. Check your contracts. It's just a fact. So, since it happens, we all know what it means. Let's face it, the actual big event that I show here probably happens 3% of the time, according to Gartner. You know what the big problem is? Human error, upgrades, updates, patches, all of that. And how does high availability help you with that? This is one of the fallacies when I talk to application owners. Application owners really believe that you in IT have it all covered because you're highly available. And when I inform them that that bad copy is now in 4 different places, they go, oh boy. They haven't really thought about that. They kind of depended that you had it all. And you guys thought they were doing it, so you stopped backups because your responsibility is point in time. But point in time for batch is a problem, because what about if the files are open? Garbage in, garbage out. They're no good. But no one's looking at it at that level. And they're not tying it together. Why? Because you're siloed. It's not really anybody's fault. It's just how it's set up. But we have to look beyond it if we're going to fix it, because we do not want these headlines. And I hate to tell you, but these aren't that long ago. And here's the problem. It used to be that our media people and the people who would protect us in our organizations from things like this, from going viral, we didn't even have the word viral 10 years ago, right? If you had a problem at your branch, it didn't get to the whole world within seconds. Twitter is not your friend. Facebook is not your friend when you have a problem, right? You ever see someone stalk and what happens to it the day after somebody has done something that's stupid? And that's our reality, right? This is the new world we live in. We used to be allowed to make mistakes. Humans aren't allowed that anymore. So how do we make it so that we make less mistakes? We automate processes that we should be automating. We accept the fact that we have to change the way we're doing things, and we move. So the question is, how prepared are you? And for most mainframers, we all say, we are prepared, we're the mainframe. We're part of an ecosystem that isn't as prepared as we think we are. And if you want to think that you're that great, that's fine. You thinking that, because we are, and I believe you. But they're not, and since they shake hands with us all the time, we better be prepared for whatever is going to confront us. So what can you afford? Can your organizations afford anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million on the low end? Those are the price tags. These aren't my numbers, right? These are the numbers that are out there. I think it's so there's no good time to fail. Now let's stick with batch for a minute here. If you have batch, you all know this, right? Batch has open files. Open files don't start up real well. You take a snapshot, a flash copy, you go up on the other side in an asynchronous. If all things go well and you're not at a high point, sure, you make it. If you're in the middle of starting up batch, you might as well fall back a little. What does your business think you're doing? No, I have a 1-hour SLA. Not if you just started batch, you don't. Not if it's corruption from yesterday, you don't. So how do I make this better? And here's one of the things that I love that mainframers are forgetting. We have this thing called tape. And invariably, all of you are going to say, but we don't use tape anymore. Yes, you do. That data sitting on that VTS is a tape data set. It still runs like a tape. It mounts like a tape. It's just under the covers. I know that everybody wants to think that they're running on DASI, and you are. You know, you get the DLM 8100, and it's the VMAX here and the VMAX there, and everything's wonderful and great. Fantastic. It's still a tape data set. He's still a multi-volume. And guess what? He doesn't always move at the same pace. He runs under a different subsystem. He's on the 7700, and this one's on the 88, right? So I have to be able to understand what those data sets are. Are they inputs? Yes, they're inputs. I've had customers who tell me, you know what, you're not going to find a single tape input. We had a project a year ago. We had like 50. We sent it away. We had all this job. We did a really good job. We moved them all. Good. You have 800 of them. You don't get rid of them. For some reason, they keep coming back. It's because it's part of the batch applications and how they were written, and people cut and paste and do different things. Those tape data sets just keep coming back. The ACS routines push them back to tape. There you are. Because who's touching those spaghetti? Right? That's another area we could talk about, right? All that spaghetti that sits underneath all those ACS routines that move all your data around. And let's not talk about how people allocate things, right? If you think the way people allocate things doesn't affect your resiliency, that's another story, right? I just cut and paste somebody's stuff that looks big enough for me not to worry. But that doesn't matter because I do space release. Okay. But if you're putting 10,000 data sets for it and they have 10,000 tracks and all they needed was 10, you're kind of wasting a lot, right? And that kind of affects your resiliency because for every copy of this information that you have, don't you have 4 copies of it? And somewhere along the line, you have to make sure you have enough storage for all of it at some point, and you have all the... So you see what not really kind of looking at your batch does? It kind of exponentially makes you less cost effective, kind of makes you have all kinds of different issues that will affect you in the long run, right? And all of that has to be accounted for in your resiliency, which it tends not to be. So the issue with backup is no one's really managing it from an interdependency perspective. They're not really putting the analytics behind it from a batch perspective. Every individual application owner has his own process in which he recovers it, and you're very fortunate if they talk to each other or even know who each other are, depending on what your organization has done with your application recovery. And not forget your application recovery. How about your application development? Do they actually talk to each other? And let's get even more serious. Do the people on the client server side talk to the mainframe side about how they're interdependent with each other and what they need to do with each other in order to make sure they're as resilient as possible? Or do you need something on the mainframe to tell you when something comes in and goes out? Right? So let's take an example of a real world example. So operations, he starts about 1:15. He calls the app teams because he has a little bit of a problem. By 2:15, the application folks figure out they need a little extra help from operations and storage. Storage folks, you remember this, right? Who at the end of the day has to solve all problems regarding anything? You've got to have a copy somewhere I can use, right? Okay. So then application says, oh, we got to research it, everybody gets together. And let's face it, there's not much you can do about this. You got to figure out where your problems happen, and that's okay. So then they recover. Everything seems to be good, but 6:45 rolls around. And you have an add-in. Why? Because you only looked at the application that had a problem. You forgot to look to see if he was dependent with anything else. So then they turn around and say, okay, we have a real problem because that application that I just overwrote didn't have a backup that actually was appropriate to it. So now I have to recreate and rerun, and now I'm up at 2 p.m. The whole world knows I had a problem. Not a good day, management's not happy, nobody's happy, you want to hide. You can't because you're the guy fixing it. Analytics says, okay, I can't get rid of the problem. Someone did do something wrong. But if I have analytics, I take into consideration the entirety of the problem. And then I'm able to restore and be running. And for most companies, 6 a.m. is okay. Not great. Maybe somebody got up really early to check their accounts, but they should just go back to bed. But better than a 2 p.m., right? And that's the difference analytics can bring. And most people don't really want to see these kind of times because they want to believe that because they put a lot of money into recovery and resiliency, that somehow there's a magic bullet. There is no magic bullet. If you don't put in place analytics and you don't put in place processes for your organization to be able to know what's going on up front, there is no magic bullet to fixing corruptions and things that get done. You don't flip to the other side because it's over there too. So, how do we do things? How do we mitigate it? We understand the risk, first of all. We accept the fact that this is a risk we have to look at. We don't ignore it. We don't put it under the covers. We don't stick our head in the ground and say, if I don't know about it, it won't hurt me, because it will. We have to understand that storage management is not application aware. They work from things from an SMS storage pool perspective. They do not care about your data. Yes, they do. They manage it. But they don't care what it is down to a data set and what it means to the business. That's not their job. And the application folks, they don't know what storage is doing to their data. They don't know you put it out to HSM level 2. They don't know that you think that it's not ever going to be used again and you're going to put it to a cloud based upon usage patterns or whatever criteria you decide to use. They have no clue what you're doing. And for the most part, they shouldn't have to. And then DR is about making sure that somehow you get on a secondary site. But DR should be resiliency. I think the whole concept of DR should be data resiliency, not disaster recovery. Because disaster recovery is only a small component of the overall. It's about how resilient is my company. Can I get my business up and running within a time frame that the business expects in their SLAs no matter what happens? Because that's what ultimately the CIO, the CXO is paying for, right? That's what he thinks he's paying for. So, at the end of the day, we actually have to talk about more bad things. So that was on the normal day. Now we have people who want to ransom it all. And we on the mainframe say, not us. Yes, us. And I wanted to put this one in here specifically to say, yes, us. Because unfortunately, a lot of us in the mainframe world think because we have such great rules and encryption and all the other things that we have, that it's just not going to hurt us. But it will. And what's interesting is I just read an article that actually is considering climate change. If you're in Miami, if you're in a low-lying city, evidently climate change is the new consideration. If that's your worry, maybe you might want to just move your data center. I don't know what to tell you. But the reality, that is another item that's put into the mix of what we have to worry about. So, being able to recover from loss of data integrity, resiliency, that is actually being application aware. That is actually being able to understand your environment and understanding what you do. And you're never going to re-engineer this. Please don't think you're going to do that. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Put tools around it to manage it. Since 97% of your problems have nothing to do with the failover you're always practicing, it's going to be corruption, it's going to be deletion, it's going to be things that you don't practice. You need to put process and procedures in place to manage them. And if you're going to put snapshots and flash copies and all of these really advanced technologies in place, put some smarts behind it. Otherwise, batch data is still going to be as bad as it was when you did a full volume. And for the most part, we're all old enough to remember what a full volume was, right? Remember, the whole concept of A-bars came into existence because when you did your full volume, you had all these data sets that weren't usable. So, in summary, it's almost 2019. The mainframe is a viable solution that's not going to go away. No matter what your management says, it's not. So let's learn to talk their language, forget RTO, RPO, and all of that stuff. Talk about their SLAs. Talk about the digital they're worried about. Talk about the encryption that they know that we can do, that they hear about. Let's talk about the things that are important to them. And then we will be leaving a legacy behind that is viable to the people that are left behind when we do move on. That's it. Thank you.